Wesley Smith, a USA Today best-selling author, is considered one of the most prolific writers working in modern fiction. In 40 years, Dean has published 200 novels and countless short stories across genres. His series include the time travel Thunder Mountain, set in the Old West, the galaxy-spanning Cedars universe, the urban fantasy Ghost of a Chance, and the superhero series starring Poker Boy. During his career, Dean has wrote a couple dozen Star Trek novels, the only two original Men in Black novels, Spider-Man and X-Men novels, plus novels set in gaming and television worlds. Writing with his wife, Kristen Catherine Rush, under the name of Catherine Wesley, they wrote the novel for the NBC miniseries, The 10th Kingdom, and other books for Hallmark Hall of Fame movies. You can visit Dean at his website at deanwesleysmith.com. Take it away.
All righty. This is, I'm staring at the Southwest Writers logo, so it feels like I'm not talking to anybody, but yeah, there. All right. Thank you for that introduction. Done more. Right now, my most popular series is a mystery series of all things called Cold Poker Gang, and that one has got 10 or 11 novels now. It's basically retired Las Vegas detectives solving cold cases. And so it's called Cold Poker Gang. But that's my most popular series, even though I'm known predominantly as a science fiction and fantasy and horror writer and other things like that. I write a lot of mystery, I write across genres, and a lot of romance at times. So I have done it all. I am married to Christine Catherine Rush. She also has written a couple hundred novels, and she's a major award winner. We are both New York Times bestsellers also. We just don't claim it much. We're multiple US New York Times bestsellers under numbers of names and different books, but we don't consider that bestseller list as really a valid one. The USA Today, which is why we use the USA Today, because that actually has valid information behind it. Does that make sense? So we work a lot. We don't really write together anymore. In fact, she never knows what I'm working on until I hand it to her. She's my first reader, and I have no clue what she's working on until she hands it to me. Our offices are literally 9 floors apart. We have a penthouse condo, and then this is our business office, where we'll probably do some workshops after the pandemic is done. We'll do some small workshops here. It can hold about 16, 17 people without problem. But I'm down here. My office is now downstairs here, which makes it a lot easier. We don't get in each other's way after 32 years, 35 years. Boy, I better get that number right. What I'm going to talk about here is called Into the Dark, which most of you understand on a basic level. But I'm going to come at this from kind of an explanation way. The Into the Dark is a really fought. People don't like it, even though most long-term professional writers use it in one form or another. It's because of our background and our belief systems and our readers' belief systems. Basically, readers and writers, when we start off, we come up through the different educational programs here in the country, Canada, overseas, and they teach us, and from a young age, we are taught that books are special and that writing must be really, really hard, and therefore it takes a lot of work. Now, when you start making writing work, all that does is bog the system down. But we are all taught that. And so as a professional writer, if I wasn't and hadn't done the last 20 years of being at SouthWest Writers and other places over the years, and being an editor, I was an editor at Pocket Books. I have edited Pulp House. I still edit Pulp House magazine. And Chris, of course, was the editor of FNSF, and she was the editor of part of Pulp House. And we've done lots and lots of books, and we still do, where we are editing. If we didn't have that background, we would not have been able to get past this. Most writers, and I was no exception to this rule, go through what I call the myth stage. If you're going to make it to long-term professional writers, which is what we teach, we only teach long-term. We don't teach how to make, $100,000 in the next year. We don't teach that. Our attitude is you're going long-term, and that's what you're going to be valued. And there's so many ways that writers burn out. But one of the ways is this belief system. And the belief system is that writing must be hard. And I don't know how much you guys can see me, but every writer starting off believes that you must write a novel from word one all the way to the last word, like a straight line. Because as a reader, that's how you read it. And so you automatically, and I was no exception, we automatically believe that the writing process is from word one all the way to the end to the final word. And that's just not the writing process. That's the reading process. But yet we all believe that. And the problem is that belief system, coupled with all of the stuff we're taught, just develops this an incredible group of myths around writing that readers believe and early stage writers all believe. Again, I was zero exception to this. And that myth system develops in the fact that, wow, a writer must be really smart to be able to write from word one and put all that nifty stuff in there and get to the end. And so that brings up the whole outlining problem. And the thing is, because how could a writer do that otherwise? Well, you do. And so the reality is here is it's those belief systems that really, really, really mess us all up right from day one. My background is I sold my first 2 short stories and a whole mess of poetry back in 1973 and 74. 74 is when I sold the 2 short stories. How I wrote those is they were a lark. I thought, oh, that'd be kind of fun, because I hated writing. I absolutely loathed writing in school. I just wanted nothing to do with it. But I got wrapped into this goofiness on the poetry because of a class I was taking. I was an architecture major. I have a master's in architecture. And they had made me take this English credit, and this professor made me mail out a poem. And I ended up winning the college poets in that year back in 74, 73. And I just like, what? And so I started paying attention to writing, and I wrote these 2 short stories. Both of them were 1,000 words long, nothing original in them. But I wrote them one draft on a typewriter with lots of whiteout. I don't know how many of you remember whiteout, and mailed them to a market because this English professor had taught me to mail stuff. And I kept selling poetry, so I thought, well, I'll try these 2 short stories. And I sold them both. In fact, on one of them, I was on the table of contents between 2 of my absolute heroes in my reading, Manly Wade Wellman and Isaac Asimov. And there's Dean Smith between the 2 of them. I'm like, the hell am I doing here? So I basically said, oh, I better learn all this writing stuff. And that's when I went right down into the myths. You must rewrite. You must do many, many drafts. You must go on and on and on like that. And so what occurred was that I fell into these myths. And for 7 years, I polished and beat on everything I wrote and sold nothing. The minute I learned all those myths, I quit selling. I mean, my stories became just normal. They just became normal. Yeah,
Dean,
go ahead.
I need to interject. I apologize. Someone recommended that maybe you could put your Zoom screen to the gallery view so that you can see everybody.
How the heck do I do that? Okay, you remember, I'm 71 years old here. I'm a neophyte.
I'm going to jump in and walk him through that so I don't.
Okay, hi, this is Kathy.
Yeah.
And Dean, look at your screen.
Yeah.
In the upper right, there's something called View. Click on it, and you've got Speaker or Gallery. If you're only seeing yourself, then you're on speaker. Click on gallery, you see,
Wow,
you see all
look
of
at all
us.
the,
And
look at
then
all
you
those
can see
people.
us waving and giving you hands up and clapping and all kinds of stuff.
Okay, good. I got it. I got it. I think I can see about 20 people now.
Sorry
That's-
about messing your.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. So what occurred, let me go back, is that in 1981, the fall, realized there were 7 long years in there where I never quit, but I managed to produce 2 short stories a year. And I was so dejected because I wrote these 2 perfect short stories for the Twilight Zone New Writer Contest. And I was convinced I was going to win that contest. Well, Chris Rush, who at this point we didn't know each other, she was in Wisconsin. She was convinced she was going to win it. Well, Dan Simmons won it, but the reality is that I was convinced, but I had beat on these 4 stories so much and polished them. There wasn't an original Dean Wesley Smith word in them. It was all just pablum. Well, I was about to give up. After 7 years, I was done. You know, I'd done other things. I got a master's. I went to law school during all this period of time. And one day, a friend of mine recommended a book from 1943, I think, or maybe 47. And it was a whole bunch of people like Silverberg and Heinlein and a few people like that, basically doing a bunch of essays on how to write. And so I picked it up. And at the very end of just the worst article I have ever read, I've tried to read it a couple times over the years, and it makes no sense, by Robert Heinlein. He got to near the end of this, like 4 paragraphs away, and he says, I don't think that's going to help anybody. I'm going to give you the real help. Nobody will pay attention. That's what he said. And then he said, I call these my 5 business rules. And he outlined Heinlein's rules at the end. And he said, the reason that nobody pays attention is because these are so simple and so hard to follow. And that's why there are so many aspirants and very few professional writers. He said that right at the end of this article, like the last 5 paragraphs was the only thing that made sense out of that entire article. And so I went, well, okay, those are simple. I can do that. Heinlein does that. And then I'd been reading some stuff that Bradbury was doing about writing a story a day and a story a week and different things. And I thought, okay, that's enough. Enough of this screwing around with all these, rewriting and all that. I'm done. And I said, okay, so January 1st, 1982, after 8 long years of having no success, none, 0, just nothing but form rejections of my 2 perfect stories and editors being so stupid they didn't recognize my brilliance, and all that. I had never dawned on me that, the 2 stories I did sell in 74, I never rewrote them. Never once, never touched them. So I started into Heinlein's rules. Heinlein's rules are simple. You must write. That's kind of what, Southwest Writers is about, is supporting writing. You must write. Rule 2, you must finish what you write. Well, if there's 1 million people that want to be writers that start into that, 900,000 of them go away with rule 1. That knocks it down to, about 100,000 left after rule 1 that actually can get to the computer and say, I'm actually going to write, instead of always talking about writing and never getting to it. The next 100,000 on rule 2, you must finish what you write. That knocks out another 90,000. About 10,000 people can actually, out of 1 million, can actually finish products. Rule number 3 is you must not rewrite. You just must not rewrite. And by rule number 3, that takes out all but, about 100, because rule number 3 goes right in the face of all the stuff that we were all trained as readers and as early writers. You must not rewrite. Rule number 4 is you must put it on the market. Rule number 5 is you must keep it on the market. Well, over the decades, I have tried to stay on those rules. I never rewrite. Never. I never look at anything I do again, not a thing. But the rule I fall off of is rule number 4. In fact, back over here underneath my desk in my new office here, I have a pile about that deep of short stories that I wrote. somewhere along the way, I'd say, oh, that sounds like fun. And I'd fire off a short story. I'd give it to Chris to read. She'd mark on it or say, yeah, looks good. And I'd put it on the pile. I have a horrid time with Rule 4. I can keep things on the market once I get them out, but I can't do anything else. So what is exactly writing into the dark? Well, it deals with Rule 3, basically. And Rule 1 and 2, you finish what you write and you don't rewrite it. What I say to you guys as writers is I'm a one draft writer. Now, if I was talking here to a whole bunch of like cold poker gang fans or poker boy fans or other stuff like that, as readers, if I was only talking to readers here, I'm a 3 draft writer. Okay, that's why King and other people, Lee Child had a reporter sitting behind him while he wrote one of the Jack Reacher books, and he didn't rewrite, he didn't touch anything. He cycled, which I'm going to talk about, but he didn't touch it. And the reporter was, of course, in the belief system that you must rewrite. And here's a New York Times bestseller going on and on about he just wrote one draft and turned it in. And that's all he did. And you go through this, and over the years, I've been friends with many, many New York Times bestsellers and other bestsellers. And if you get a drink in them, what happens is they will tell you the truth. They don't rewrite, but they tell their fans that they do, because the fans are all taught exactly the same way. The fans are, if you walk up to a group of readers, of your readers who are hardcore readers, and you say, oh yeah, that book took me a week and a half to write and I never touched it, you're going to devalue the book in their mind. You're going to make that book worth it. And see, what you want to do as writers is you want them to pay money for your books. And so you can't go to your readers and devalue it. You must actually do what Lawrence Block, who is a one draft, always has been writer his entire career, and he's still writing. But as Lawrence Block said, you tell lies for fun and profit. You tell lies in your fiction. That's the name of one of his writing books, actually, Telling Lies for Fun and Profit. But if you're talking to readers, you're a couple draft writer. Now, how do I get to be a multiple draft writer when I've just told you guys, yeah, I just write it and I'm done? When I get to the end, I never look at it again. I just don't. Chris will put little typo marks. I'll go through and put the typos in, but I don't read it again. Why would I? I've read it. My method is, and has always been since 1982, which is going on 40 years now. Is that right? Yeah, that's the math. 40 years of this is that I'll fix the typos. So doing fixing typos on a novel, like I have a novel sitting right here that's part of my next magazine. And, and Chris has got typos in it. She's read it. It'll probably take me 20 minutes to fix her typos that I agree with. Sometimes I don't agree with some of the stuff, and that's it. And I give it off to WMG and they get it into print. WMG is Chris and I's company, by the way. We're indie writers, but we have employees because we can afford it, because we make so much money that it's, it's just ridiculous. Our company is in Oregon, by the way, and we have 5 employees up there who basically, I send it to them. And, I imagine a few of you are thinking, but what about copy edits? Well, they have a standing rule. If there's a typo, they fix it. Otherwise, they don't touch it. I don't want anybody else in my work. I am a multiple New York Times and USA Today bestseller. Why would I want somebody I hire who is not a writer touching my words? I believe in my art and I defend it. Anybody who's sitting in a workshop and letting other people committee your work, well, that's what happened back in the day when I spent 7 years not selling. After 1982, I started sending out a story a week. Even though I had 3 jobs at the time and owned a bookstore at the time, I started sending out a story a week. Heinlein's rules, never touched it. Never touched the story, just mailed it. And what occurred is within 2 months, I was selling again. And by that end of 1982, I had sold 9 professional short stories to all the top markets except for Asimov. Never sold to Asimov. But, you know, I'd sold all of them. You know, not all the stories I wrote. A whole bunch of them did get sold, of course, because not every story works. But that's how Heinlein's rules helped me. So what is writing into the dark? Hang on here a second. I got to turn that off. I got my email. I don't know if you guys can hear it or not, but it's driving me crazy. So writing into the dark, it's imitating how readers read. You are writing like a reader reads. It is mind-numbing to me, and I had to do, when I was writing media work, I had to do outlines. Here's how I got around that. Like I did 35 Star Trek books, 35 in every series, except for the new one. Of course, I'm not writing Star Trek anymore. They can't pay me enough. But the reality is in every one of those series, I had to do an outline that Paramount at the time had to approve. So I'd do an outline, usually 2 or 3 pages, usually with the last part saying, and there'll be a big battle scene here and it'll end happily. That was literally on my outline, almost all of my outlines. And the people at Paramount would approve it. They'd send it back to me. The editor at Pocket would send it back to me, and I would throw it away. I just throw it away. I go, delete. Only it wasn't by email. It was actually, they mailed it back to me and I didn't care. I just delete it, you know, and throw it away, throw it in the garbage can. And then I'd write the book I wanted to write, which was sort of on the idea that I had pitched, but just, I couldn't remember the outline. I wouldn't do anything else. And nobody ever cared. Nobody ever cared. Not a one of them. And then, of course, New York is required, and I don't know, most of you don't know this or not, but if you're doing traditional, which you should not be doing these days at all, because they'll take all your copyright and you won't get anything out of it. But back in the day, back in the 80s and 90s, I sold my first novel in the late 80s. What occurred was that to spread the cash flow out that they would give to writers, they required, even if the book was perfect, even if they bought it, they required a rewrite. So on some of the editors, I would just say no, or I'd just mail the manuscript back. Some, if I knew the editor, and you know, because I was working for 7 or 8 different companies at the time. One of the things that I would do if an editor was like, uh-oh, it's a young editor, they're really gung-ho, and I'd get like 2 pages of corrections and all that stuff, I'd do the first one and the last one. And then I'd write them a letter back saying, wow, these were the greatest. Oh, you were so smart. Oh my God. And I would go on like that, and they would never look. They'd look at the first one and say, oh, he did them. And maybe look to the last one. Oh yeah, he fixed that. Never touch anything in between. I'd have to sit on the manuscript for 3 or 4 weeks to make the editor, because the editor believes that writing takes time. So I could do the entire rewrite in an afternoon, and then I'd put it in a drawer for 3 weeks, just to make sure that the editor understood that I had worked really hard for them. I'd write an entire another novel before I'd send them back their silly rewrite. That's the reality. Then when I became a New York editor, I started learning all kinds of more stuff. I have, of the 200 plus books that I have published, I have 3 books in New York that went through the New York system through a major publisher that not one person in New York ever read. And they were my first draft. And they're out there in paperback. 3 that nobody read, 0. Maybe the copy editor. And one of them didn't even have time for a copy edit. It was under that kind of rush system. So, you know, that's the myth of all of that. That's part of the myth of how important New York is, and how it's worthless and they'll take all your copyright. But you got to remember how readers read. So if you're talking and someone comes up, like I just wrote a book in a half a month and did a book about it, and it's now out in a bundle right now, actually in Story Bundle, on how to write a book in a half a month. That's the title of the book. And I blogged it every night on my blog. Those blogs every night are chapters. So I'd tell what I did all day. And I just picked a time to write this stupid book at one of the busiest times I've had in the last 2 years. And so it's all detailed out there. I mean, there was one day I literally didn't even have time to write 15 minutes. And so it's all detailed in this book. Well, what occurred on that is if someone walked up to me right now and said, Dean, how did you do that book? And hadn't read the blog, because I never mentioned which book it was. Don't do that. And said, Dean, how did you write this book? How was it? I said, well, I worked on it a long time. Why? Because it would feed into their myth. I worked on that. I came up with that idea a long time ago, even though I don't come up with ideas. I plug in a title and start writing, but that's sort of been bubbling around. And if I really get, really in a kind of a snotty mood, I'll say, I kind of been working on that book for 40 years, which is how long I've been, since 1982, that I've been actually doing this correctly. And I'll say that because it plays right into their myth. It plays right into what they want to hear. And therefore they'll spend the $5.99 or whatever for the electronic book or the paper copy. And the book has value to them. Okay, so how does a real professional writer do it? Well, I thought I was the goofiest person on the planet, and I didn't want to talk to anybody about this, but that's sort of against my nature. So I came up in the old timers. Sadly, all of my mentors are gone. I mean, Harlan Ellison, Algis Budrys, Fred Pohl, Gene Wolfe, in that area. But I could sit around in bars with these people, and Kate Wilhelm and Ursula Le Guin. I got so lucky to be around these people, and I could sit in bars and talk with them because I was selling and they considered me a pro. And I was also publishing, Pulp House Publishing at the time. I was the publisher, and we'd get drinking and I'd say, look, I'm doing this goofy thing with my writing. I'm cycling. That's what I call it. I'm cycling. And they'll look at me like, do you do that? Do you know anything about that? And 9 out of 10 of them will say, yeah, that's exactly how I write. I'm like, what? I thought I was totally unique. What cycling is it basically, I'll go about, from the beginning, I start, usually, I'll go about 400 words. And then I bog down. I just kind of go, my fingers stop. And I go, okay. And I'll come out of the book and I'll go back 400 words and I'll just kind of touch it and add a little more depth and add a little more, characterization here, a little bit there. And then I'll make it that momentum will make me another 400 or 500 words. And then I'll bog down and then I'll pop back out and go back about 400 or 500 words. So if you looked at the pattern where a reader starts here and reads in a straight line to the end, my pattern is loop, 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 loop. I'll have 100 loops through a 300-page novel, 400 or 500 loops. And if I get to a point and I put something in and say, oh man, that's got to be set up, I'll just come out of the timeline of the book and go all the way back to where it needs to be set up, drop back into the timeline, set it up, and keep going through the book. So, I basically don't outline, because outline is from the critical voice, not the creative voice, which is in the back of your head. I just start writing and let the characters tell the story. So an experience of writing a book for me is exactly like reading a book. It's exactly the same experience. I have zero idea what's happening next. None. Now, at times I will grant you, that can bring up some fear. That can bring up some stomach acid, like you're going along going, oh, where's this going? And I cannot tell you how many times I've come back from writing session and, Chris is the same way. She writes exactly the same way, although she tends to do it in parts. She'll write like a novella that's going to, win awards and Asimov's, and then she'll write the opening of the book. And so she's out of the timeline completely, and then she puzzles it all together, and writes a segment that is a little hook between the two parts and all that. And that's how she tends to write. That would drive me crazy. I kind of like the reading process. I read, all of us are avid readers. And so, I want to imitate. An outline to me is like saying, someone walking up to me, handing me a book, telling me every detail of the plot and how it ends, and then say, have fun reading. And I'm like, why would I do that? I don't want to know how it ends. I want to spend time making up this story and going all the way through. And that's how readers read. So I imitate, in my writing, as I'm typing, I imitate the reader's experience. If I don't know what's going to happen next, no readers ahead of me. If I, because I know plot and been at this for a long time between editing and writing. I know every plot there is. And the reality is if I don't have any idea where something's going, no readers ahead of me. And so my books are always in that kind of thing. I also have got away from fear. I do not understand fear when it comes to writing. And yet I'll bet most of you are dealing with fear in one form or another. Nobody can hurt you. Nobody. They can't come to your door because you wrote a bad novel or a bad short story and say, oh, no, you're dead because you wrote a bad story. No, there's absolutely nothing that can happen to you. Nothing. And the problem is all early stage writers can't get that through their head. They can't go at writing as if it is a joy. You know how many people are looking for the secret of writing? I've been wondering, people have been wondering that over the years, and for 40 years now, I've heard that discussion. Oh, there's a secret. If you do this, if you write first person, if you write third person, oh my God, if you write, and it's just stupid. It's just all stupid. Basically, you should write exactly what the story demands and nothing more. If the story demands first person, write it first person, third person, whatever. But there is a secret to writing. And I have learned this from every professional writer that is long-term, meaning been around for decades, like me and Chris. Writing's fun. That's why I have this pile of stupid short stories down here that I'm going to put in my magazine at some point, is that, writing is just fun. So I'll sit down and I'll have a blast writing in this short story that I have no idea where it's going to go. I wrap it up. I give it to Chris. She'll say, oh, that made me cry, or oh, that's a good one, or that's dumber than hell. And I'll go, great. And I'll put it on the pile. Why do I care? Do I care about making money? Well, I care about making sure my stuff gets out as much as I can. But again, I fall off of Rule 4 all the time. And, Chris has this thing about not wanting anything on her desk. So the minute she finishes something, it's gone. Me, I have piles of unwritten stuff. I mean, the written stuff that I've had fun writing. So for me and for Chris and for others, the joy is in the writing. And the reason, and that's truly the secret, every writer I know long-term has made writing fun, has made it an adventure, has made it like thriller writers. Basically, a thriller is a roller coaster. So a thriller writer, which I wrote, I have 2 series under pen names out there, still in New York. I can't get them back yet because I have a do not disclose on the pen names. But I was a major thriller writer, New York Times on both of them. And the truth of the matter is I love writing thrillers. And now I'm in a phase of my life where I kind of like writing these kind of fun puzzle mysteries and these kind of space opera things and goofy fantasy. And so I'm kind of in a more relaxed, I don't need that roller coaster at the moment, but I'm fairly certain in a year or two, I'll get back to, I'd really like to ride a roller coaster again. It's all fun. It's all just a really, really good time, but I don't have any fear because I know if I write in something poor or whatever, it just won't sell many copies. No big deal. I'll write something else tomorrow. And that's the bottom line, is there's no reason to be afraid. But I'll wager by simply saying fear, I've triggered into a lot of you. Oh, what happens if I waste time? If you're writing, you're not wasting time. Doesn't matter if it's good, bad, or indifferent. Plus, you as writers are the worst judges of your own work. When I write something, I get done. It is like a bad habit that you have to judge your own work. I mean, it's a really dirty habit, actually. And I'll say, oh, this isn't very good. And I'll give it to Chris, and she'll say, oh, that's one of the best things you've written this year. And I'm like, good to know. I can't judge my own work. She won Hugos for editing and other stuff. She can't judge her own work. She thinks something is slow and dull, and she gives it to me, and I can't put the stupid thing down. It's such a good read. Even people like us over all these years, if you think you're going to get better at judging your own work, you're delusional. It will not happen. So cycling. The key with cycling is that you got to keep in your mind that you're not stuck in the timeline of the book. If you want to understand how this works, Kurt Vonnegut wrote a book called Slaughterhouse-Five. And there's a movie called Slaughterhouse-Five, where Billy Pilgrim is unstuck in the timeline of his life. He can go to his birth, he can go to events along the way, he can go all the way to his death. It's a World War II novel about Dresden, but basically it's Vonnegut showing writers how you work in that timeline of what a reader's going to see. They jump into the book, they don't know where it's going, and they're going to get to the end on a straight line. But you can write parts all over the place and jump out and cycle like I do. About a third of the writers I know write like Chris. They do it in long-term professional writers. They do it in segments. Chris says if she could stop that, she would. She'd go back to cycling, but she can't seem to. Me, I just cycle. I just imitate. I go about 300-400 words and so the process is I come out of the timeline, I go back, drop it back into the timeline, fix things. So by the time I'm done, if you want to look at it in a, oh my God, the myths, I've probably rewritten the book 5 or 6 times on every word all the way through, because that's just what I do. So I don't think I have anything much more. The secret of writing is just having fun. Have a blast. If you can't sit down alone in a room and make stuff up and not have fun, you're doing it wrong. It's bottom line.